Hey everyone, and welcome to Travel Through Stories. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about Saša Stanisic's novel, Where You Come From. This was translated from the German by Damion Searls and published by Tin House just a couple of months ago at the end of 2021. And Damion Searls, by the way, to start with the translator, is one of my favorite translators. If you've ever read any of Uwe Johnson's Anniversaries or Jan Foss's Septology, you've read Damion Searls. He's translated from Norwegian, German, French, I believe. He's all over the place, and I often just search what he's translated recently, and it's actually why or how I came across this book. But anyways, Saša Stanišić is a Bosnian German author who has won quite a few awards for his novels in the past few years. Most recently, he won the German Book Prize in 2020 when this was originally published. But as far as I can tell, much of his previous work deals a lot with fables and myths and retelling old stories. In fact, the next novel of his that I'm looking forward to reading is Before the Feast, which does a lot of this stuff, but actually my wife bought this for me for Christmas before she even knew I was reading Where You Come From, which was quite a serendipitous moment. But Where You Come From is a biographical novel in that blurry realm of autofiction, which is a term that I struggle with because I see the uses of it, but I also see how it's just kind of a problematic word because it doesn't actually mean anything. But this novel is unabashedly autobiographical in a lot of ways. Many of the details in this novel map directly onto Stanisic's own life. He was born in Yugoslavia, but he and his family fled the region in the early 90s to flee the Bosnian War. And this book is really about him trying to reconcile his current status as an immigrant from a country that no longer exists. And this project actually reminds me quite a bit of Pajtim Statovci's work, because his family also fled this region. Statovci writes in Finnish, but what makes Stanisic's Where You Come From so compelling is how he focuses on his own family history and his own fractured identity as an immigrant, as a Yugoslavian, as someone writing in German that isn't his native tongue. He writes pretty early on, "Here's how it is. The country where I was born no longer exists. For as long as the country still existed, I thought of myself as Yugoslavian. Like my parents, who were from Serbian Orthodox father and Bosnian Muslim mother families. I was the child of a multi-ethnic state, the fruit and avowal of two people who were drawn to each other and whom the Yugoslavian melting pot had liberated from the constraints of different origins and religions." And Stanisic explores this multi-ethnic state of Yugoslavia through all of these anecdotes about his family, most primarily stories surrounding his grandmother, who is getting quite old, and there is this reckoning with her impending death as the figurative nail in the coffin to his connection to what used to be Yugoslavia. But alongside these anecdotes in which we're sucked into the past and into these digressions and anecdotes about various members of his family, there is this narrative of this young boy named Saša, perhaps some version of the author, perhaps not. Again, it's in that realm of autofiction where you're never quite sure what's autobiographical and what's fiction, if differences can even be made. But as Saša is a young boy in Germany, where he's trying to figure out how to go to school, how to fit in, how to learn German. But like so many good family stories, time falls apart in this narrative as we're constantly moving back and forth, as we're constantly, again, being sucked into the past and sucked into this digression about this random family member. Time is never linear. The opening chapter actually opens with this brilliant little line that suggests that nothing in this story is going to be linear. It just ends with, "It is March 7th, 2018 in Visegrad, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Grandmother is 87 years old and 11 years old." The storyteller, Saša Stanišić, is a time traveler, and it's through him that we, the readers, constantly move across time and place. The past obviously informs the present, though, and young Saša, when he's in Germany, is trying to construct his identity. And obviously a very large part of anyone's identity is their and their own family's history. And young Saša realizes this. And we get this great little line that I just really like. "People make their own history under conditions already present, given, handed down from the past." This book accepts that fracture as reality and in a way tries to put the pieces back together. But at the same time, it's fully aware that that project is impossible. I think there's almost nothing worse than knowing where you belong and not being able to get there. History is constructed, but there's no way to construct all that was, or to reconstruct all that was lost in the Bosnian War. Yugoslavia is gone, and there's no way to fully get it back. And in fact, much like Stefan Zweig's memoir, The World of Yesterday, there is, in Where You Come From, this ongoing lament for this lost world, this meditation on this history and this place in the past that is gone, this lost part of Saša's identity. Visegrad, where he grew up, turned into something completely different during and after the war. A place that is no longer accepting of that multi-ethnic population that our narrator so adored about it. And what's particularly interesting about this is how Stanišić, in his own longing for Yugoslavia, realizes the political dangers of such nationalistic desires. When back in his hometown, the narrator is looking around and it just reads, "I began thinking about my origins, revisiting and documenting my biography in diaries and notes and fictions, trying to find what aspects of where I came from might have turned me into the man I am today, then questioning the whole thing. It seemed old-fashioned, regressive, even destructive to talk about my origins, or our origins, in an age when where you were born and where you came from were once again being misused as distinguishing features, when borders were hardening, and so-called national interest rising up from the drained swamp of small country particularism, in a time when exclusion and refusal of entry were on the ballots again." This conflict between longing for this national home and being wary of such longings is really at the heart of this book. And in what I think is a pretty brilliant move, Stanišić doesn't provide a solution to this conflict. In fact, the future is, in some ways, left up to us, the reader, as some 60-odd pages from the end of this novel, this book just turns into a choose-your-own-adventure novel. And we, the reader, are given control, or at least the illusion of control, as is always the case in a choose-your-own-adventure novel. We're given control of Saša. And I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of choose-your-own-adventure, of the structure of choose-your-own-adventure novels, but the story that the choose-your-own-adventure section of this novel tells is absolutely amazing. It's like a fable or a myth, and it's all about his relationship with his grandmother. But it reads very much like a fairy tale, and it's incredibly moving, and it's some of the best writing in this story. So this was a really interesting novel, or memoir, or whatever you want to call it, and it did a lot with family and cultural memory, the fallibility and the problems of that memory, social history, fractured identities, and in many ways the structure of this novel matched or mapped onto those themes. And in that regard, it reminded me a lot of Fowzia Karimi's Above Us, the Milky Way, which is a brilliant book that also looks at these ideas of a fractured identity, the fractured identity of an immigrant, especially an immigrant from a war-torn country. In Fowzia Karimi's case, it's Afghanistan in the early 1980s, where here it's obviously the Bosnian War of the 90s. And they both focus on how storytelling can, in some ways, repair some of those fractures. But let me know if you've read Stanišić. I'm very excited to read his Before the Feast, because I want to see what he can do in a more, I don't like the word, but like in a more traditional novel, a novel that isn't super autobiographical. But I found Where You Come From to be a really, really compelling book. So let me know what you think. And for now, thanks for watching.